What if I told you the biggest economic showdown of the 21st century isn't playing out on battlefields or inside diplomatic summit rooms? It's unfolding in the invisible plumbing of money itself, currencies, reserve assets, settlement rails, and the fast-growing universe of digital tokens. While most people fixate on Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods, a much larger strategy has been taking shape behind the curtain. A three-pronged approach that uses trade policy, gold, and cryptocurrency in tandem. An experiment that, if it works, could reshape the global financial order. This isn't about picking political sides. It's about seeing, in real time, how power moves when the weapon is not a missile, but the dollar sign. By the end of this story, you'll understand why Trump is treating Bitcoin like a strategic reserve, what the strange reality of America's gold accounting really implies, and how both threads tie directly into the escalating economic contest with China. To understand what's at stake, we have to start with a simple fact that quietly governs global commerce. For roughly 75 years, the U.S. dollar has functioned as the world's reserve currency. In practical terms, that means when countries trade with each other, oil shipped from Saudi Arabia to China, electronics sold from Japan to Germany, the transactions are typically priced and settled in dollars. That gives the United States a kind of structural advantage that's hard to overstate. It's like owning the main currency exchange booth at the center of the world's marketplace. The more global trade flows through dollars, the more American financial influence is reinforced, over and over again. But the dominance has been thinning. For more than a decade, China has been working to reduce global dependence on the dollar, a process widely known as de-dollarization. Beijing has expanded gold reserves, promoted alternatives to Western payment rails, developed and rolled out its state-backed digital yuan, and encouraged trading partners to settle transactions in currencies other than the dollar. By late 2024, the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves had fallen to about 58%, down from roughly 68% a decade earlier. That drop may not sound dramatic until you remember that reserve currency shifts usually happen like glaciers. Slow, then suddenly. Even a 10-point slide is a seismic move in this world. This is the environment Trump's strategy steps into, a layered response meant to defend dollar relevance while also building alternative sources of American financial leverage through the possibility of gold revaluation and the explicit creation of crypto reserves. It's bold, historically unusual, and it's happening now. Let's begin with the part everyone can see. Tariffs. In February 2025, Trump imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese goods, citing fentanyl concerns and border security justifications under emergency economic authorities. Then the escalation accelerated. By March 2025, that baseline doubled to 20%. And in early April, everything detonated into the moment Trump branded Liberation Day, the 2nd of April 2025, when he announced reciprocal tariffs on almost every U.S. trading partner. China, specifically, became the center of gravity. After retaliations and counter-retaliations, the combined tariff rate on Chinese goods was described in multiple reports as surging to as high as 145%. And just when it seemed like the ceiling had been reached, October arrived with threats of still more, another 100% on top of what was already in place, as the rhetoric intensified. At first glance, it looks like straightforward protectionism. Make Chinese imports more expensive, push production back to America, punish Beijing, win leverage. That's part of it, but it's not the full game. A deeper objective sits underneath. Force China toward negotiation while accelerating the global diversification of supply chains away from Chinese manufacturing dominance. Here's what actually happened as the pressure rose. American companies did shift production, but not primarily back to the United States. A large share of the movement went to Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and India. Wells Fargo data has been cited to show that over the past decade, the proportion of supplier volume concentrated in China, Hong Kong, and Korea dropped from around 90% to about 50%, and the speed of that shift accelerated sharply during the 2025 tariff shock. Logistics data also pointed in the same direction. Trade lanes and container flows increasingly favored Southeast and South Asia as firms raced to reroute manufacturing footprints and shipping paths. Project 44 data, for example, described Chinese trade rising with Indonesia, Vietnam, and India, while U.S. inbound container trade volumes from Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia rose as supply chains rewired under pressure. China responded in kind. At one point, Beijing's retaliatory tariffs reached roughly 125% on U.S. goods, while it deployed something far more powerful than tariffs: export controls on rare earth elements, materials essential for electronics, defense systems, and semiconductors. China controls a dominant share of rare earth processing capacity globally, making these restrictions a genuine choke point. That created multiple leverage nodes at once: manufacturing inputs, defense supply chains, high-tech components, and political pressure inside economies that suddenly felt the shortage. By October 2025, Trump and Xi met in South Korea and reached a temporary de-escalation framework. The terms were described as significant. China agreed to suspend or delay rare earth export restrictions, remove retaliatory tariffs affecting key U.S. agricultural products, and commit to buying at least 25 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans annually through 2028. In exchange, the U.S. reduced tariffs on Chinese goods to 30% from the peak levels cited earlier, and suspended certain export controls of its own. The details varied across reporting and how combined tariff totals were calculated, but the direction was clear: step back from the brink, lock in concessions, keep the rivalry intact. Now comes the key insight. The tariffs aren't only about trade. They're also about time and pressure, creating economic stress up front, while Trump builds up reserve power in the background through crypto policy and the potential of gold. The tariffs are the visible weapon. Gold and crypto are the quiet stockpiles. Think of tariffs like a boxer's jab: constant, disruptive, keeping the opponent busy and off balance, while gold and crypto are the heavier punches being set up behind the guard. And that brings us to the move that surprised a lot of people: Trump going all in on cryptocurrency as national strategy. In March 2025, he signed an executive order establishing the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and a separate United States digital asset stockpile. Never before had the U.S. government formally treated cryptocurrency as a strategic reserve asset in this way. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve is built from Bitcoin the government acquired through criminal and civil asset forfeitures. Reporting around the order described the U.S. government holding roughly 200,000 Bitcoin assets that earlier administrations had sometimes sold, but which Trump's order directed should not be sold going forward. In the way it was framed publicly, Bitcoin would be treated like a long-term reserve asset, a kind of digital Fort Knox. In parallel, the U.S. digital asset stockpile would hold other cryptocurrencies' assets such as Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and Cardano, also largely acquired through forfeiture. Unlike Bitcoin, these non-Bitcoin holdings could potentially be sold at Treasury's discretion, depending on stewardship strategy. Then came an even more ambitious proposal. Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced the Bitcoin Act, proposing that the Treasury directly purchase up to 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years, aiming to hold roughly 5% of the total Bitcoin supply. At April 2025 prices, that was often framed as an $88 billion-scale acquisition plan. The stated goal was clear: position Bitcoin as digital gold, a reserve asset for the 21st century. Why does this matter in the competition with China? Because China took the opposite approach. Beijing banned Bitcoin domestically and built a fully centralized, state-controlled digital currency, the ECNY, often called the digital yuan. Unlike decentralized crypto, the digital yuan is designed for maximum state visibility and control. It can be monitored, shaped, and at least in theory frozen by authorities, and it hasn't been confined to domestic use. The digital yuan has been tested and deployed in cross-border trade settlement with partner nations. In October 2023, PetroChina completed what was described as its first international crude oil trade, settled in digital yuan, purchasing 1 million barrels, symbolically important, even if modest compared with the total oil market. China also built alternative financial plumbing. It expanded the cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, an alternative messaging and settlement channel, sometimes framed as a partial workaround to SWIFT. CIPS has grown to include a large network of participating institutions globally, supporting China's push to settle more trade in yuan and reduce reliance on dollar-centered systems. This is de-dollarization made concrete, not just talk, but pipes and rails. Trump's crypto strategy was a counter-move. By building a strategic Bitcoin reserve, the U.S. was effectively signaling, we're not copying China's centralized surveillance-style digital money. We're leaning into decentralized crypto and building a reserve position in it. That message appeals to countries that distrust China's state monitoring model, but also want options beyond total dollar dependence. It positions the U.S. as the champion of financial openness versus China's model of programmable state control, and stablecoins became the bridge between the two worlds. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and others emphasized that dollar-backed stablecoins could reinforce dollar primacy by creating fresh demand for U.S. treasuries because stablecoin issuers often hold treasuries as reserves. A large share of dollar stablecoin activity happens outside the U.S., particularly in developing countries with unstable local currencies. USDT Tether, the largest stablecoin, has circulated at massive scale globally, and banking analysts projected that by 2028, a large majority of stablecoin usage could originate from emerging markets. In this framing, Trump's digital dollarization doesn't require a government-issued digital dollar at all. It uses private stablecoins pegged to USD to extend dollar influence into places where traditional banking is weak or where China is pushing ECNY infrastructure. In July 2025, Trump signed the Genius Act, creating the first federal regulatory framework for stablecoins, marketed as a move to make America the crypto capital of the world, while locking in reserve requirements designed to prevent the next stablecoin collapse. The strategic logic was blunt. If China is building centralized digital currency infrastructure to bypass the dollar, America will back a crypto ecosystem that keeps the dollar relevant in the digital age. Now we get to the most intriguing and least understood pillar of the strategy: gold. The United States holds roughly 8,133 metric tons of gold reserves, about 261 million troy ounces, the largest official gold holdings of any country. Much of it is stored in places like Fort Knox, Kentucky. But here's the bizarre accounting twist: the U.S. Treasury's official book value for that gold is about $42 per ounce. Not $4,200, not $3,000, $42. That creates a valuation canyon. At the official price, the U.S. gold hoard is worth only about $11 billion on paper. At market prices, it's worth hundreds of billions, potentially far more, depending on where gold trades. Using an illustrative market price around $3,000 per ounce, the market value lands near roughly $784 billion, implying a gap of about $773 billion versus the official valuation. And by late 2025, gold prices were described in many market reports as pushing far beyond earlier forecasts, adding even more tension to that gap. Besant talked publicly about monetizing the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet, later clarifying that he wasn't specifically announcing a gold revaluation plan. Still, the speculation wouldn't die, because gold revaluation has historical precedent. In 1934, during the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt revalued gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, effectively devaluing the dollar by about 40%, combating deflation and easing the real burden of debt. In modern terms, if Trump revalued U.S. gold reserves to current market prices, it could add roughly $750 billion to the federal balance sheet overnight, not by borrowing, not by raising the national debt, just by recognizing the real market value of assets the government already owns. And some analysts floated even bigger numbers in monetary reset scenarios, revaluing gold to $10,000, $20,000, or higher. At $20,000 per ounce, 261 million ounces would imply about $5.2 trillion, big enough to materially change the optics of a roughly $36 trillion national debt. In the math used by advocates, every $4,000 move in gold translates into roughly $1 trillion of additional notional value across the U.S. stockpile. Whether those scenarios are realistic is another question, but they show why gold sits at the center of speculation whenever confidence in fiat systems wobbles. So why might gold rise dramatically? This is where China loops back in. China has been buying gold aggressively after Russia was hit with major sanctions in 2022 when portions of its dollar and euro assets were frozen. Countries everywhere got the message. If the U.S. can freeze Russia's assets, then dollar holdings can become geopolitical liabilities. In that environment, gold looks like financial sovereignty, and in July 2025, Trump signed legislation that, according to how it was debated and interpreted, could potentially open pathways for the U.S. to seize or freeze Chinese foreign exchange reserves under certain national security scenarios, including extreme crises tied to Taiwan, reparations claims, or other triggers. Whether or not such a tool would be used, the signaling effect matters. China's response: accelerate de-dollarization, expand gold accumulation, deepen alternative payment systems. By 2025, more than 30% of China's trade in goods and services was being conducted in yuan, up from about 14% in 2019. China also extended massive RMB swap lines reported at roughly 4.5 trillion yuan, around $630 billion, to dozens of central banks, creating a financial safety net that rivals IMF-scale influence in parts of the world. That creates a fascinating feedback loop. As more countries worry about the weaponization of dollar assets, they diversify toward gold. As gold demand rises, gold prices rise. As gold prices rise, the latent value inside America's gold hoard rises, and if a future administration revalues that hoard, it gains fiscal flexibility without traditional borrowing. It becomes a kind of monetary chess match. China's attempt to move away from the dollar can inadvertently inflate the strategic value of the very U.S. gold reserves that serve as a hedge against dollar erosion. Of course, not everyone sees this as clever. Some economists warn that a dramatic gold revaluation could look like accounting manipulation, undermining confidence in the dollar and triggering volatility or capital flight. Others argue it's a necessary adaptation to a multipolar financial world where the dollar can't rely solely on dominance by default. Trump also expressed interest in auditing Fort Knox, an idea many people interpret as a possible precursor to any revaluation conversation. In February 2025, he announced plans to visit Fort Knox with Elon Musk to verify that the gold is still there, even as Treasury Secretary Besant insisted it is. Now step back and look at how the three elements connect. The tariffs generate immediate economic pressure and accelerate supply chain diversification away from China. They dominate headlines, force negotiations, and push companies to restructure where things are made. Crypto policy positions the U.S. as the leader of decentralized digital finance, offering an alternative to China's surveillance-heavy ECNY model. It extends dollar reach through stablecoins while also building a Bitcoin reserve that could appreciate dramatically if global institutions keep moving into digital assets. Gold sits as the deep, long-game insurance policy. If de-dollarization accelerates and the dollar weakens, gold tends to rise, making America's reserves more valuable exactly when the challenge intensifies. Think of it as three layers that unfold over time. First comes the shock and pressure stage tariffs. Then comes the medium-term infrastructure stage stablecoins, crypto policy, and digital reserve positioning. Finally comes the long-game hedge gold as the ultimate balance sheet backstop. The genius, if it works, is that each layer can reinforce the others. Tariffs pressure China and force supply chain shifts. China responds by pushing de-dollarization that can raise gold demand and stablecoin adoption. Rising gold boosts the embedded value of U.S. reserves. Stablecoin adoption keeps the dollar relevant in digital transactions, and a Bitcoin reserve may gain value as institutional adoption grows. China, meanwhile, hasn't been standing still. Beijing's response has often been less about loud tit-for-tat escalation and more about building parallel infrastructure. The digital yuan has been deployed systematically. Cross-border trade settlement in yuan has expanded. CIPS transaction volumes were reported as surging. One set of figures described a 43% jump in 2024 to about 175 trillion yuan, roughly $24 trillion. China and partners also advanced mBridge, a multi-CBDC cross-border settlement network developed with other central banks. Reporting suggested it processed billions in pilot volumes, and more importantly had crossed a threshold where even small-scale usage carried geopolitical weight. An American official in early 2025 summarized the concern bluntly. The economics might still be small, but the geopolitics had become real. China also retaliated selectively rather than symmetrically, using targeted tariffs, export controls on strategic minerals, restrictions on specific companies, and pressure on politically sensitive U.S. agricultural sectors. At the same time, Beijing accelerated Belt and Road lending and encouraged trade settlement in yuan rather than dollars, and it kept adding gold. Even when China's central bank paused officially reported gold purchases after May 2024, analysts argued that accumulation could continue through unofficial channels. Then there are the contradictions. Trump wants a weaker dollar to help U.S. exporters, but also wants to preserve the dollar's reserve currency status. Those goals often collide. No strategy is risk-free, and this one carries several serious risks. First, the tariff escalation itself. By April 2025, the average applied U.S. tariff rate was described as reaching about 27%, the highest in over a century. Major U.S. retailers warned that a deepening trade war would show up as visible price increases and product shortages. The approach also triggered legal challenges. In May 2025, the U.S. Court of International Trade unanimously ruled that Trump's emergency tariff approach under IEEPA authorities was illegal. The decision was appealed, and the policy environment remained uncertain for businesses as tariffs continued through subsequent periods. Second, the administration was juggling conflicting macro goals. A J.P. Morgan analyst noted in May 2025 that if Russia eventually received sanctions relief, you could see a new stream of petrodollars flowing into the market. Yet the broader strategy also leaned on tightening economic pressure and using financial tools in ways that can spur diversification away from the dollar. Third, crypto brings its own landmines. Critics argued there were conflict of interest concerns. Watchdog analysis reported that 19 White House officials held between $800,000 and $75,000 and $2.35 million in crypto assets that overlapped with tokens proposed for reserve treatment. If government policy legitimizes and boosts those assets, officials could personally profit. Then there's volatility. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies remain highly speculative. A strategic Bitcoin reserve ties a slice of public wealth to markets that can swing violently. Fourth, gold revaluation, if it ever happened, could be the most destabilizing of all. Markets might interpret it as a sign of fiscal desperation that could trigger currency volatility or capital flight from dollar-denominated assets. Critics call it accounting manipulation and warn it could undermine confidence in the dollar, creating a politically tempting, easy money mechanism that encourages irresponsible expansion. And finally, there's the diplomatic risk. When a country weaponizes economic policy, freezing assets, threatening extreme tariffs, questioning alliances, it can accelerate the very de-dollarization it is trying to slow. Economists like Barry Eichengreen have warned that the dollar's global role depends not only on America's economic size, but also on institutional trust and alliance relationships, trust that can be damaged if the U.S. is perceived as turning away from partners. So where does this lead? In the short term, tariff negotiations keep cycling. The fall 2025 trade framework created a temporary window often framed as a 90-day structure, yet fundamental competitive issues remained unresolved. Both sides showed willingness to negotiate, but also willingness to escalate when leverage demanded it. In parallel, crypto infrastructure has been built in real time. The Genius Act stablecoin framework took effect in July 2025. The strategic Bitcoin reserve was established and could grow through ongoing forfeitures and budget-neutral strategies. Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act, authorizing direct purchases up to 1 million BTC, remained under congressional consideration. Gold is the wild card. Trump announced plans to audit Fort Knox, which many interpret as a precursor to any serious revaluation discussion. But no concrete public revaluation proposal had been formally adopted as of December 2025. Meanwhile, major banks published forecasts for gold's trajectory, with scenarios extending well beyond earlier year-end targets, while central banks continued buying at near-record levels. Several futures are possible. One is a status quo path. Tariffs stay elevated but stable. The crypto reserve grows mainly through forfeitures, and gold stays booked at the official $42 valuation while market prices rise. Another is a digital dollar victory. Stablecoin adoption accelerates in emerging markets, the Bitcoin reserve appreciates, and digital dollarization counters the spread of China's digital yuan. A third is a monetary reset. A fiscal crisis or confidence shock triggers gold revaluation to market levels or higher, reshaping global money around more explicitly asset-backed frameworks. A fourth is de-dollarization acceleration. U.S. policy contradictions and aggressive financial weaponization backfire, driving faster diversification away from the dollar than crypto adoption can offset, leaving gold rising, but dollar status deteriorating faster than reserves can compensate. The most likely outcome may borrow pieces from all four, unevenly distributed across time, regions, and political cycles. Zoom out far enough and you can see what this really is. Not just U.S. China competition, but the potential end of the post-World War II monetary order. For decades, the Bretton Woods legacy and its informal continuation kept the dollar at the undisputed center of global finance. That system is fracturing. We're moving toward what economists call a multipolar monetary world. Multiple reserve currencies, multiple payment systems, competing digital infrastructures, and no single nation enjoying the same leverage the U.S. once did by default. That shift isn't automatically bad for America, but it demands a different playbook. Trump's three-pronged approach seems to recognize that defending absolute dollar dominance may be impossible at this stage, so the strategy pivots. Keep the dollar relevant through digital innovation, build alternative reserve value through Bitcoin, and preserve latent monetary power through gold. For regular people, this isn't just high economics. It affects the strength of your savings and purchasing power, and it shapes the price and availability of the goods you buy. At a broader level, it influences market stability, alliances, and the evolving tension between financial freedom and financial control. So, is Trump's strategy working? It's too early to say definitively. The components are in place. The execution is underway. But the real results won't be obvious for years. What we can say is this: Trump assembled a three-pronged approach aimed at different dimensions of the China competition. Tariffs create immediate leverage. Cryptocurrency builds future digital infrastructure. Gold reserves provide insurance against dollar decline. Whether that combination preserves American financial dominance or accelerates the transition to a multipolar monetary system remains to be seen. What's certain is that we're living through the most significant monetary shift since World War II. Decisions being made right now by Trump, by Xi, and by central banks around the world will shape the financial architecture the next generation lives inside. This isn't about one president or one policy. It's about the architecture of money being rebuilt in real time. And that's why paying attention to gold reserves, Bitcoin accumulation, and tariff policy isn't just about headlines. It's about understanding the foundation our economic future is being built on. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the economic forces shaping our world.